Good to go. All right, David, we are good to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. I will call the meeting to order. The first order of business, I believe, is a call of the roll. Tom, I'll turn that over to you.
Hartwell.
I'm here.
Hartwell present. Shara. Baird.
Present.
Baird present. Representative Burkle.
Burkle present.
Burkle present. Edmondson.
Here.
Edmondson present. Eggerling.
Here.
Eggerling present. Senator Herr. Holston. Holston.
Mark, you're on mute.
Yep, got it. I'm here.
Holston present. Senator Lang. Representative Lilly. Saxog.
Yep.
Saxog present. Swenson.
Here.
Swenson present. A quorum is present.
Great. Thank you, Tom. First order of business is to review and approve the agenda. I would take a motion to approve the agenda as in your packet.
So moved.
I hear a motion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next is to approve the minutes of our last meeting. I would take a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion. It's Kristen.
We have a motion. Any
Support.
suggestions, corrections?
Boy, we don't need support, do we?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Are there any conflicts of interest to bring up regarding today's meeting? I'm hearing none. My comments will be brief, but basically thanks to the staff for putting together the accomplishment plans and an analysis of it. It makes our job so much easier. I was a little, the number of things that weren't addressed in the accomplishment plan that the staff pointed out was a little concerning, but we'll talk about that later. And Mark will talk about prevailing wage and the progress that's been made there and in helping everyone understand what prevailing wage means to them. He's, I know, done a lot of work to stay on top of it and push that. So thanks to staff for that. And those are my comments unless there are any questions for me. Hearing none, I will turn it over to Mark for an executive director report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome members to another meeting. We have a good but not extremely long agenda for you this morning. So my report is fairly quick, but I do want to point out a couple of things. First of all, in your packets, there is, as David mentioned, some materials on prevailing wage. First of all, there is an outline from the Department of Labor and Industries, which is under their heading on their letter, on their heading paper, and it gives direction to the recipients of outdoor heritage grants on how to provide for prevailing wage when they're doing their, when they're working with their contractors. There's also another spreadsheet in there, which is several pages, and I just put that in there too, so you could kind of see what they had done. The nonprofits or the NGOs had all pretty much gotten together with DNR, put together their list of what they do for jobs that are not really necessarily listed under prevailing wage at this time, or as of a couple months ago when they met. And listed the jobs out, listed what they do, what are the reported tasks involved, what was the description of the job and so on. And then DNR took that, added to the list from their jobs and everything they have, and forwarded that on to DLI, the Department of Labor and Industry. DLI then went through it and provided a code match for each of those activities or those jobs out in the field. And these are really the nondescript labor, I'll call them nondescript labor jobs in the field, like bud capping and removing beaver dams by hand and just things like that. Taking care of clearing buckthorn, whether it's with machinery or with light machinery or by hand and so on. And if you want, you can take a look through that and see how those code matches intersect with these jobs and what the direction is that's given to the groups. And then lastly, there's a page that I put in the packet that comes right off of DLI's website. And it actually is, there's an interactive map on their website. So a recipient can actually go on the map, click on their county or their region to see what are the prevailing wage recommendations or the basic rate recommendations in effect for that area and in effect for each of the different labor codes. So you can take a look at it. I just put in the one which was basically the northeast region, which is Carlton County, Cook, Itasca, Couchiching, Lake Pine, and St. Louis counties. And as a group, it shows that what's the effective date would be, well, and it shows the date, but it also shows the basic rate, the fringe rate, and then the total rate that's expected under prevailing wage. And for just a couple of things, I only copied for classifications, job classifications 101, which is labor, and that's a common labor work, or 102, which is skilled labor work, because those are the majority of the areas now that are going to be utilized under the prevailing wage directions that have come from DLI. And I'll caveat that by saying that in the past, the heavy equipment operations for prairie restoration or for wetland restoration have always been paid prevailing wage. All the contractors do that, DU, PF, whoever, when they're putting out those RFPs for heavy equipment, prevailing wage has always been included or provided. It's these other, as I mentioned before, kind of nondescript labor jobs or more ambiguous labor jobs that had been falling through the cracks. So the direction is there now from DLI. Another reason for me printing this out, or for printing this out, putting it in your packets and also posting it, is so that all of the NGOs and the recipients now have this, whether they had received it previously from DNR or not. It's available. They can take a look, and then, of course, as usual, if there are questions, they are encouraged to get a hold of DNR, their grants management people, or get a hold of DLI, and because those are the entities that you're going to want to work with. So, members, if there are no questions on that, at least we see there's some light at the end of the tunnel here, and I think everybody's got some pretty good information to move forward with. There's no questions, I'll move on to the next thing. That is that, let's see, a couple of items for you. First of all, I was able to go out and meet with the DU Habitat team on Lake Christina and also the DNR back in the late October. And it was really interesting. It was fun to see the new professionals coming into the field of wetland restoration and enhancement, wetland management, and also prairie management, because we've got a lot of young people coming into the field, and was really exciting to see. But what I wanted to report to you was that Lake Christina was teeming with ducks, or with waterfowl. And yeah, there were mallards and wood ducks and redheads, and there were geese, and there were swans, and a few mergansers. But what I saw, primarily at least 80% were canvasbacks. And there were probably, I asked the guys, how many do you think are here? And they said, there should be between 4,000 and 7,000 here right now. And this is just the beginning. So it was really interesting. There were probably 30,000 coots on the lake too. So you add them into the waterfall, but that's not a bad thing. Coots are a good sign as well. Wonderful work on Lake Christina, and I think that the DNR and Ducks Unlimited both deserve a real high praise for that wonderful work. The lake is coming back. It's looking good. Also, we had a non-public tour of the St. Louis Estuary Outdoor Heritage Sites with MLT and with DNR. And Suzanne and Kristen were both able to attend that along with Joe and I. So maybe Suzanne, Kristen, would either of you like to say a word or two about what you saw? Looks like
Thank you.
Suzanne's queuing up here.
Appreciate that. It was an amazing tour, and I'm really glad I had the opportunity to get out there to see. I've heard stories about what's been going on up there and over the years, and just the amazing changes and restoration that's been going on up there has been well worth the investment we've made in what's going on up there. If you look at some of the historic photos and the amazing amount of damage that was done to that estuary, it was phenomenal with, all of the logging and work there and the contaminants that had flowed into that system. To see kind of the techniques that they've used to really restore that area has been pretty phenomenal and stuff. So, and I think that's a very important spot within the state that really had needed restoration as well. So I'm really pleased that this board has been able to support that project as much as it has. So it was a beautiful day and we had a great time, so.
Kristen, you have any comments?
Yeah, I would just say I learned so much. It was a beautiful day and it was lovely. But how they took the waste product and they created, I don't know if they're islands or whatnot. It just was a concept I'd never heard of, and it really was worthwhile. So I highly recommend if we can do it again, or if other members could go and see it. It's worth your time.
I really appreciate you two being able to forward your thoughts onto the council, because not everybody can make these, and we don't expect everybody to attend these, but by sharing the knowledge, hopefully everybody gets a little better feeling of what's been happening, and good and bad regarding any of the sites that we go and visit. There was, just to give you an update also, the Janelle and Ben and myself, and also Brad Hagmeyer and Dan Mueller were able to join, met with DNR regarding the Pittman-Robertson. This is just an update for you because I've been mentioning this for a while. We met with DNR regarding Pittman-Robertson, and it's the attachment of Pittman-Robertson funds to OHF acquired WMAs or AMAs, OHF acquired lands. It was a good meeting. We're looking at some ways to provide some extra clarity in the accomplishment plans as we move forward. And so that's an ongoing meeting and ongoing discussions with DNR. I think right now, I just got a note from DNR, they're working on some language, Janelle and Ben, so we'll be giving some future updates on that, probably not till spring though. And then lastly, we've had quite a few inquiries from potential recipients regarding potential projects. People wondering, what is this project we could do, or how do we ask for funds, et cetera. So I think it's an excellent time for me to also mention to each one of the members that if you hear of a group or an NGO or whoever it might be that's interested in outdoor heritage funds, receiving those funds or potentially seeking OHF funds or CPL funds, please let me know or let staff know. We can meet with those people and we can provide hopefully some direction for them, whether it's affirmative that what they're looking at is great, or whether they should really be looking at a different fund to seek their dollars. We are willing to help them find out that information as well. So please let us know if you have any leads and we will follow them up. And then lastly, what I have is in your packets, actually it's the next business item, so I don't know, we could go there, David. Are there any questions for me so far? Ron is here. Ron has a question.
I didn't have a question. Curious, getting back to the prevailing wage issue. Early on when that first came up, there was concern among the council here about how much this would impact the conservation and environmental projects. Would we be getting less for the money, et cetera, et cetera? Is there some way that the NGOs and others can sort of capsulize what this has done or will do, and so that everybody knows what we've done or what has been done? by the prevailing wage guidance?
That's a really good question, Member Shara. I don't think that figure can be worked out right now. I think it's something we're going to have to look at on the back end, so a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. Just as a ballpark, my best estimate is that we're going to be looking at about a 35 to maybe 40, probably 35% higher labor wage, or higher labor going out for these particular activities. Now, with that, we got to remember that it depends on how much of those activities are utilized in the field. And as I said, there were a lot of the types of work were already in prevailing wage, so that won't change. That's already at scale. It's these other hand labor or closer to hand labor activities out in the field. The more enhancement and restoration that's done with those activities, the higher we're going to see the difference. But like I said, we can just ballpark it right now, and then we really have to wait to see.
Well, thank you. Just one other comment about your Lake Christina experience. This is what happens when you're around as long as I've been. There were a lot of mistakes with Christina early on by both the Fish and Wildlife Service and Ducks Unlimited, trying to control rough fish, bullheads. In fact, a bunch of us were invited one time to fish for bass out of Lake Minnetonka before the season opened, and bring those bass in. They were going to put them into Christina to eat the bullheads. And that worked for a little bit, but when they were trying to get the bullheads out of Christina, there's another little lake connected to Christina that they didn't stop anything from coming in. So whatever they were taking out of Christina, the rough fish were coming in from the small lake. But I'm glad to know now that maybe we've solved the problem, but it certainly worth saving, but oh my, it took us a long time to get it right.
Yeah, it's worth putting in a mention here too, that Lake Christina will never be a clear water lake. It's just not that kind of lake, because there's too much wind fetch on the lake and so on. But the watershed is so well protected right now with easements. It's just amazing, the work that's been done by DNR, by DU, by Bowser, by all the different MLT, TNC, just all the different entities getting involved with protecting the watershed. It's really exciting. So,
There's a pass there called $1 Million Pass. Did you stand on that? Look at it.
I did not stand on that and look at it, no.
It was owned by the Daytons at one time. Hence the dollar figure, I think.
I think that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. I would just run, the answer to your question on prevailing wage, if you look at it, the general labor figure that Mark pulled up was in excess of $60 an hour. We can all guess what was being paid before that, but I think Mark is a little light on the increase and where we have general labor. I wouldn't be surprised to see us see output of half of what we've been seeing. So it definitely has a big impact. So the next thing on our agenda is approval of the tentative calendar. If you'll remember, we approve a calendar subject to new members being selected, which is a process that, as we know, doesn't happen on January 1st as it should. It tends to take a while. But we still need to approve a tentative calendar so everyone can get the dates down. That calendar was in your packet. I'm wondering if everyone looked at it and if there are any immediate thoughts of dates that just don't seem to work for you. The only one that I saw was our January meeting. If we could move that until the 2nd or 3rd, it works better for me. I wouldn't be remote, but only if it works for everyone else. Otherwise, I'll just be remotely calling in.
Jamie has a input, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I do have a conflict with May 21st, but I know that I'm up for, or my term expires, and so that would be a tentative conflict.
Is that a 1-day conflict or a week or two or?
It's a week fishing trip, so a week conflict.
Well, good for you.
Mr. Chair,
Does
the
anyone have a
21st,
problem? Yeah,
Mr. Chair, the 21st isn't particularly good for me either, although, yeah, I'll be out of the country on the 21st. So.
how long are you out for, Tom?
Well, I think that the week after, I'll be back.
Okay.
Be gone about 3 weeks.
What does the 27th look like for everyone?
What month are we looking at?
May.
May.
That's the day after Memorial Day, Mr. Chair. Just
Oh,
as
that's a really lousy day. How about the 28th?
I see heads nodding on this end.
That'd probably work.
Okay with me.
All right.
That work, Jamie?
All
So
right.
change that to May 28th instead of May 21.
I don't see any reason not to on a tentative basis.
And Mr. Chair, you had asked if we could change the January meeting from the 9th to the week previous to either the 2nd or the 3rd. And of course, the 1st is New Year's Day, so the 2nd may
That
not
would
be the
be-
best.
Yeah, if we could do it on the 3rd, that would be great for me. But again, if it creates a conflict for anybody else, there's no way we should change it.
Mr. Chair, is the legislature, when do they come in session?
I think it's the
Legislature comes in
14th,
session on the 13th.
13th.
Oh, really, not that late? And so the 3rd would be what day?
Friday.
Friday.
Friday, the 3rd of January.
Is everyone okay with that? Does anyone have a conflict? I'm hearing nothing. Can I assume that that means no one's got a problem?
I can get back on the council, but my term is up in January, but otherwise I'll see you then.
All right, with everyone's permission, we'll switch it to the 3rd.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, if I may, with regards to terms for those members who may or are up for reappointment or replacement, whichever is your desire, you serve until you are replaced or you desire not to serve anymore. So,
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say, Dudley, in January 3rd, you're likely to still be on the council.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. And of course, the important thing that we do then is approve the call for proposals, as well as get various updates. But the critical thing really is to make sure we're in agreement on the call for proposals before it goes out. So I don't think we need a formal motion, Mark, on the calendar. We can just assume that we've worked it out and you'll publish the tentative calendar for everyone to work from, unless I hear an objection.
sounds good, Mr. Chair.
All right. Next, we have a presentation on wind easements and conservation, and this issue has been brought to our attention in southwestern Minnesota. There are many wind companies that are leasing ground that then make conservation very difficult because those easements preclude other easements and protection of property. And so we have a presentation for you on that today. And Mark or anyone on the staff want to tee this up better than I did?
Mr. Chair, I'll try to queue it up while they're getting up the PowerPoint for Mr. Traba. This goes back several months ago. I was at I can't remember where it was. Somewhere I was listening to Mr. Traba give a presentation on this, on wind easements, and it was at the Prairie Chicken Society annual meeting last spring. And it was pretty interesting, the challenges that may be in front of conservation with regards to wind development and the two interacting on the land. So I asked him if, I approached the chair to ask if this was something that might be interesting to bring towards or in front of the council, and he agreed. And I asked Mr. Traba, and he said, well, he'll talk to leadership and see if and when he can, and this is when he can. So Dave Traba, please entertain us with your presentation. This will be interesting.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Chairman Hartwell, council members, good morning. Dave Traba, currently serving as the interim wildlife section manager for the Minnesota DNR since July. And then prior to that, for 9 years, I've been the regional wildlife manager in the southwest part of the state, southern region. So that's why you have the regional wildlife manager talking about wind development, because we've been the epicenter for that. And then prior to that, 24 years out at the Lackborough WMA. So my entire career in Region 4. But before we get into this topic, we're gonna digress a little bit, because he talked about my favorite things, waterfall and waterfall management. So I'm just gonna impress upon the council, I've been at this for 33 years, and I've told you last time I was here what the absolute game changer has been with the Out There Heritage Fund and our ability to manage shallow lakes and wetland habitat management. In my entire career, I never believed we'd be able to do the things we are today. So if you were to take a tour for Region 4, we could go to, I think we're designating 2 different lakes a year, which gives us the ability to do water level management on them. We're working with drainage authorities where we're rerouting county judicial ditch systems. We're able to restore wetlands. Things that, as a wildlife manager coming into this field, and I never dreamt possible. And again, that's all through the Out There Heritage Council. When you have our partners, Fish and Wildlife, DNR, all rowing in the right direction, we're making a big difference on the landscape. So I just want the council to know that, say that again. Then the other thing I'll digress a little bit is, if you love waterfall migrations, the next 5 days are it. Do whatever you can to be out in the marsh, wherever you want to be. There's going to be millions of birds moving through Minnesota with the change of weather that we have coming online. So I digressed a little bit. Now we'll get to the topic at hand. So what I'm going to do today is talk about wind development and our conservation agenda. So I'm going to talk about where are the wind resources in Minnesota, what is the current development field look like, and what's we see as coming as new and projected wind development coming online. And then we're going to spend some time talking about wind easements, the scale of wind easements. Now that issue is relatively new. You know, it was actually our conservation partners that brought that to our attention. Now we're going to go a little bit about bird and bat mortality. That's been known for a while, but we'll talk about, because we got new information for here in Minnesota, and then where do we go from that. I find this subject to be at times difficult to talk about. As a wildlife professional, as a natural resource professional, we all are in line on trying to move towards carbon-free sources, right, of energy, reduce our imprint on climate change. And I would also say, you know, in 33 years, I've seen the impacts, like the high-intensity rainfall that we get nowadays, and how that's changed our wildlife management areas, the waterfall production areas, our wetlands with that rapid delivery of water. I always laugh now when the National Weather Service says we're gonna get 1 inch of rain. I start multiplying that by 3. It's like, oh, we're gonna get a 3-inch rain event. Now 3 inches to me is like, that's a typical rain event. So that high precipitation events, and then followed by drought. And, you know, so if you talk to our state climatologists, things are changing. So having said that, and then also as a DNR, right, it's our duty to help the state responsibly develop our wind resources. And wind resources very much a resource just like anything else to develop. However, as our talk will show, there are some challenges with wind energy development, with energy development in Hull. And I think this is just an open and honest discussion and how we work forward and move forward together in a mutual fashion. So with that, this is, now, it might be a little bit hard for you to see, but I want you to focus on the map on the left-hand side. I really want you to focus in on that red, those bright red fingers. That's the Prairie Coteau, right? If anyone's familiar with southwest Minnesota, you get up on that high escarpment, that Prairie Coteau. And then that orange color, that's the epicenter for wind energy development right now in Minnesota. But we have wind energy development also taking place in the south central and moving into Region 1. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you see the brown color on the map, stretching up to the northwest part of the state, all that area is now available for wind energy development because the wind turbines are becoming more efficient. They're becoming larger in hub height, the height off the ground. The rotor diameter is getting longer, right? So they can produce energy at less wind speeds. Now, the sweet spot, right, the more wind you have, the better. But I just want folks to know that what you see in that brown on the map, which also lines up very, very well with the tall grass prairie, right? If you know your biomes of Minnesota, that lines up with the tall grass prairie. That area is where we're seeing the potential for wind energy development. Now, the map on the right, if anyone wants to go on this, U.S. Turbine Database site, U.S. Wind Turbine Database, type it in. All that color you see on there are the wind turbines throughout the United States. Again, U.S. Turbine Database site, that is this data set that we use to build this presentation. So when I show you where the turbines are at, that's accurate within a foot or so of that turbine, right? The Public Utility Commission requires wind developers to submit their turbine data information to this site. You can go on there, you can zoom in, you can see how many megawatts that turbine's producing. You can see the number of turbines on there. It's all very accurate. Again, that is the data set that we use. Now, when I hit my mouse click the next time, what you're going to see is 30 years, you're going to see a map, and it's going to start kind of building upon, so I call it a heat map. The darker the colors, the more turbines. You're going to be seeing 30 years of wind energy development in this part of the state. So here it starts. So you can notice in Lincoln County. And again, we'll just let it progress through time. So again, that's 30 years of wind energy development in Minnesota. You can see the bright orange there up in Lincoln County. So when I click on it again, so right, what does that represent? That represents 70 large wind energy conversion systems. Large wind energy conversion system would be any wind development is over 5 megawatts in size within so many miles of one another. That represents 2,732 wind turbines. 96% of them are in Region 4. And for our discussion, which we'll home in a little bit more today, that's approximately 690,000 acres of easements. And then we talked about Lincoln County. Lincoln County has the most turbines at 643, the most large-scale wind energy conversion systems, and 2 new wind developments are in the planning stages for roughly 4,785 megawatts of energy. So that's the current status of energy development in Minnesota. Now that's expected, again, the best we know, to double potentially, right? So if you know our regional, we have 4 regions within the DNR administrative units. So all of our regions have wind energy. There's 52 turbines up in Region 1 right now, 15 up in Region 2. That's the northeast part of the state. That's Taconite Ridge. And then there's also 54 turbines right now in Region 3. The biggest one is Black Oak, Getty, and Stearns County. So now when I press the button again, you're gonna see that red map change just a little bit. If you'll notice, there'll be another finger coming out, kind of that extension to the east in the Coteau. We'll go into this a little bit more. So this is what we're looking at as permitted and proposed wind developments coming online Right now, the best we can track, that I was able to track, was 14 additional large wind energy conversion systems coming online. Combined project area of 1.3 million acres. Now, I want to be real careful with that. A project area means the developer comes in with early coordination and saying, hey, here's the big area that we are searching, okay? And in there, they might say we have this one, of 800,000 acres, we have secured 300,000 acres of wind easements. So we've had early coordination come on with some companies, and they'll sit down and say, we have secured 160,000 acres of easements. Another company came in a few months ago and sat down and said, we have secured 200,000 acres of wind easements in this project area. And those project areas are normally a county, maybe a 2-county area. And so just for a little bit of reference, 200,000 acre translates into 312 square miles or almost 9 townships. So as a wildlife professional, when I sit down and I, if they're looking at Lincoln County or Lyon, Murray County, and they say have 200,000 acres of easement, think of the scale of that in my mind. One in Region 4, our entire WMA system is around 200,000 acres spread across 32 acres. So you get a little bit of that sense. Now, the footprint of any individual turbine is small, right? 1.5 acres. You need a gravel road coming in, rotor pad, the tower. So the actual turbine can have a small footprint. If we're looking at acres, we'll talk a little bit about sky as habitat later on. But I look at this, these are big project areas. When someone comes in and says, our project area in 3 phases, 800,000 acres, that makes the wildlife professional and me sit up straight thinking, okay, what does that mean for wildlife land conservation in the future? So that new energy coming online may represent 700,000 additional acres of wind easements. That's 16 counties, but it's mostly concentrated in Lincoln, Lyon, and Murray counties. So for approximately another almost 4,000 megawatts of energy. And again, I stress that is what is known for us today. Kind of hard to predict the future a little bit sometimes. So this map here, existing, permitted, and proposed, now we're just gonna delve in a little bit more. So again, might be hard for you to see, but all those black dots on that map are actual wind turbines. Those are from that wind turbine database. Now the red color, if you know this is again focused on the southwest part of the state. Again, look at the map on the left. The red color is one wind development, and the yellow color is another wind developer. That's encompassing Lincoln, southern part of Lyon and the northern part of Lyon County. Then you got some other colors throughout. Those are all different new wind energy development projects coming online. If you focus on the right-hand side of the map, that's up in Clay, Wilkin, Otter Tail counties. The farthest green area, and the color on the map represents native prairie. It might be hard for you folks to see, but if you see that green color and you see the yellow, that yellow is native prairie and a whole ribbon of public lands. In Clay County, if you know your birds, right? That is some of the best for what we have left for prairie grouse habitat, prairie chicken habitat in Minnesota. So that eastern part of Clay County is very important for us for conservation purposes. So I know our staff are working with that wind development company to make sure that towers are sited appropriately. But then you also have another area down in Otter Tail County. So just kind of looking at a different map showing the scale of these projects and size. So let's walk through this slide. This slide actually tells a lot of the story here. So the Public Utilities Commission is the regulatory agency for wind development in the state. And they have what they call 5x3 rotor blade diameter setback. So 5x3, and that's set up because every landowner has wind rights. So if I'm a non-participating landowner, a wind energy company needs to have a setback for my property, 5x3 rotor blades. So 5 is normally on the prevailing wind direction, north to south, right? That can vary based on development. And then 3 rotor blade setback on the non-prevailing wind direction, which is, you know, typically east to west. Again, there is some variation in there. So that's the setback requirements. So I'm a non-participating landowner. Again, if that tower needs to be either 5 rotor blades setback from my property or 3 rotor blades setback from my property, again, to protect my wind rights. Wind has a lot of value. The last figures I saw were around $5,000 to $6,000 per megawatt. There's a per acre payment. So there are, I mean, on an annual basis, millions of dollars of economic activity with payments to landowners just for the right to let wind blow across your property. I call them buffer wind easements. Or if you allow the company to put an actual tower, substation, power lines, that's what I would call an operational wind easement. So millions of dollars of economic activity. And then the counties also get a little bit of that production tax credit too with wind development. So that's set up, again, to protect non-participating landowner rights. Our public lands are considered non-participating landowners. We do have a setback from our public lands, our WMAs, our waterfall production areas, our scientific and natural areas. But those are conservation easement lands, et cetera, do not. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more. So if I look at the graph, so on wind development, the first development started in 1994, and wind turbines at that time were smaller. That would be what you see on the left-hand side, okay? So maybe there was, the setback was only 0.16 mile, or 1.6 miles, 0.16 miles, excuse me, setback. Again, turbines were smaller. The rotor blade diameter, you know, how big the blades are smaller, so you take that measurement times 5. Now, as we see wind development occurring, the turbines are getting larger, right? We're gonna start seeing some that are up in that 5 megawatts potentially in size. So that setback requirement takes a 0.4 to 0.5 mile setback. So when you look at a wind developer, they need to just demonstrate to the Public Utility Commission that they have enough wind rights to actually have a viable project. So it's very difficult for wind developers, I'm sure, to site these projects, because when you get those big turbines and you need to have that much setback, right, that takes up a large amount of countryside, amount of real estate. And that really what drives the amount of wind easements necessary. Because if you have a half-mile setback, there's a 250-foot setback from roads for ice being thrown off the rotors, right? I'm sure it's very difficult to kind of site these. So that's where they need to have all these easements to be able to allow them to site these wind projects throughout, so. And I mentioned the public lands have setback requirements. Our private conservation lands do not, Bowser easements do not, habitat. And I bring that up because wildlife responds to habitat. They don't say, oh, that's a WMA, that's where I'm gonna be. So when we talk a little bit more about the mortality issues, disturbance issues, that comes in. And then that knife cuts both ways, right? As a public DNR, as a Fish and Wildlife Service, we can impede on that 5x3 rotor blade setback requirement. And we just had an acquisition recently down in Nobles County where it's a nice parcel, willing seller, PF is interested in that case and pursuing it. And I looked at the map and I'm like, wow, no, we can't accept this, because if we were to purchase that land, we would be within that 5x3 rotor blade setback requirement, right? So that again, that knife cuts both ways, if you will. There was something else I was gonna say on that, but I lost my train of thought a little bit. Yeah, I think we'll go on to the next slide. So Public Utility Commission has PUC and applicant site control. So if we look at the map on, let's just look at the map on the right a little bit. All those black dots represent the actual turbines. Again, for some of you in the audience, might be hard to see. The green is where we estimate the wind easements are. Again, that is our best approximation. That data layer does not at this time exist. So we had to go and make some assumptions. I can say we did look at other site maps and environmental assessment worksheets, and I think our work was very accurate. The red is our WMAs, the yellow would be native prairie, and you can see on the left hand just how tight that density of turbines is next to native prairie and a lot of our public lands being surrounded. So But what is the issue with easements? So land conservation, we cannot purchase lands or place habitat easements on lands that contain a wind easement. Those wind easements have terms and conditions that are unacceptable to the state of Minnesota and our federal partners. Indemnification is one thing. There's a whole bunch of terms in there that when our legal staff with our lands and minerals looks at them, it's like, I'll use the word, if you will, they're poison pills. Now, can you get out from underneath a wind easement? Yes, it's been done, but it is very difficult. Really, the landowner would need to do the work, right? That easement's with the landowner. A lot of times they are reluctant. I was at a Fish and Wildlife Service partner meeting on the tall grass prairie work, and their real estate people said, yeah, Dave, if we encounter a wind easement with a landowner, we're just gonna go on to a different project. Again, it can be done, but it is extremely difficult. Again, we currently estimate there's 600,000 acres of wind easements that exist just in Region 4. And again, if we factor in new and soon to be built, we're looking at probably, I'm gonna go factor it down a little bit, maybe 1 million to 1.5 million acres of wind easements in Minnesota. And again, that's concentrated in just a few counties, and that's equivalent to our entire WMA system. Again, easements concentrated, I just said, in 4 to 7 counties. I call it conservation in the dark. As a wildlife professional, and I spent, again, my career putting habitat on the ground, I don't know where these easements are. Now, I have seen some of their easement maps during early coordination. And I can tell you a lot of our public lands, areas that the Out There Heritage Council have invested in are now surrounded by wind easements, but it's that change. So I call it conservation in the dark, and we're gonna look at Lincoln County and focus on it. I think it's an issue that we need to work through. And I don't want to come across as critical. Everyone's working in good faith here. The wind companies are working in good faith. This issue is just something that no one was aware of. Until our partners again came to us and said, Dave, we're running up against wind easements, and our own acquisition staff were running up against wind easements. And then I started asking myself, well, how many acres of wind easements do we have? And that started this whole thing. 2 years ago, I knew nothing about wind energy, nothing. Well, a little bit. But I just took it in the last few years. I just read every article I could on it, all the environmental assessment documents, took a crash course, and that's why I'm here today. So now we're gonna focus on Lincoln County. That's Lincoln County here, about 300,000 acres in size. Hard for you folks to see, but all that brown is wildlife habitat, okay? It's either a wildlife management area, a waterfowl production area, an SNA, rim easements. Lincoln County, I rank as number 2. My folks in Region 4 will hate me for this, but it's my second favorite county after Big Stone, right? As for the amount of wildlife habitat. That's about 100,000 acres of wildlife habitat in Lincoln County. That's pretty phenomenal. Lincoln County leads Minnesota in the amount of Conservation Reserve Program acres. At one time at a high of 50,000 acres. Right now they have about 30,000 acres of CRP in Lincoln County. So my point is, a very important county for wildlife habitat. What you might not be able to see on that map is everything in the yellow would be our public lands. We have 67 wildlife management areas. Lincoln County has the highest density of wildlife management areas. It has about 30 waterfowl production areas. Again, just a tremendous resource. If I click on it now, you'll see the tan color. That's your Minnesota Prairie Plan in action. There are 2 prairie core areas. So my point here is that as resource, as our partners, we have invested millions of dollars in conservation in Lincoln County. The dark you would see would be pheasant complexes and other things. The red outline are conservation focus areas. They are centered on the Minnesota Prairie Plan areas. That is really targeted to species of the greatest conservation needs. So that's where us, the DNR, Ecological Water Resource staff, all our partners, NGOs working together, working with private landowners to put as much habitat on the landscape. So now we're gonna go and we're gonna look at the evolution of wind development, which again, we're out doing our good work. Wind developers are all doing their good work, and we'll kind of see how they all come together. So that's hard to maybe see again for an audience, but it looks good on my map. But again, that's Buffalo Ridge in 1994. That's the first wind development in Minnesota. That was before we had any, I would say, rules and regulations on wind development. I think that caught a lot of people back flat-footed, what does wind development mean? And I remember, reading some of the early research on it. But when I focus here on you, so the white would be the actual turbines, and then the dark black would be my estimation on the operational easements, and the lighter gray would be what we believe is the buffer wind easement. So we're gonna look at this in evolution in time. So Lake Benton, number 1, okay, just came up on your screen. Now, the other thing I want you to notice, as these developments occur, you're gonna see more yellow. That's the rotor blade setback. Again, look at the early turbines. If you can see those white dots, look how close those turbines are together. Again, smaller rotor blade setback, the 5x3 requirement. They didn't need as much land. So watch how that changes as we move on here. So I'm not gonna go by year. It's mostly gonna be in the southwest part of the state, 2000, 2001. Then we had a number of projects, 2003, 6 coming up. Now, if you see on that map a little more yellow, right? Turbines are getting larger. Community wind development. Now you're going to start to see Red Pine, I believe, in 2017, Blazing Star 1, Blazing Star 2. Then you're going to see a repower. You're going to see that first Lake Benton disappear. And then you see Buffalo Ridge repower, and if you notice how the turbines became larger in size. So it's normally at this point where I pause just a little bit to gather myself. And just want to point out that there are 2 companies, for the past 2 years that have been taking additional wind easements in Lincoln County. So I testify here before today, the best I can gather that we can gather is that about 50% of Lincoln County is bound by an easement, by a wind easement. And with the 2 new wind developments in the planning stages, it could be as high as 70%. So if you look at it that way, 70% of the county is unavailable for land conservation by either, RIM, CREP, CRP, I think, would still be allowed in our DNR acquisition, partner acquisition, Fish and Wildlife Service. And so that's a pretty busy map. And when I talk to our staff that live and work out in Lincoln County, no one really understood the scale until you have the map in front of you. It's kind of akin to you folk live in a metro area, right? There's a housing development goes up, then another one, and then all of a sudden 15 years later, it's 5 miles of housing development. But you really never notice it until you look at a map and it's like, wow, look at all that. And it's the same with wind development. It happens as humans, we don't really recognize things that come very gradually. We're kind of more of that immediate type threat. So when I look at that map as a person that puts habitat on the ground, I just wonder, where do we go with conservation in Lincoln County? There's room, but it's awfully crowded. That's why I tell people Region 4 is an awfully crowded region to do conservation in. And the reason we are focusing on Lincoln County today is because that same type of development pressure is going to be moving into Murray County and Lyon County real quick, the same scale. So if we look at, some of the issues with, wind development, the indirect offense, disturbance and displacement. And I actually think this, we'll talk about mortality coming up a little bit. I actually think this is rival to it. Now, this is very hard to study because you don't have a lot before and control after, meaning you need to do these studies where wind development moves in, or oil development, whatever it is, and you got to have areas where you have that development occurring, and you got to be doing research in areas where that development is not occurring so that you can really compare apple to apple. So, for example, you might show that, grassland birds are declining over here where we have wind turbines, but you might find where there are no wind turbines, those same bird populations are declining. There's something else going on. So some of the best research we had just was out of North Dakota just recently, and they demonstrated grassland nesting birds up to 30 meters I can't, my screen's covered up here a little bit. I think it's 53% displacement of grass and nesting birds with up 30 meters of turbines. Other studies have shown displacement up to as far as 1 kilometer away. So again, I know the Fish and Wildlife Service is developing a tool where they're looking at that displacement of grassland birds to help them guide where they should put their conservation efforts in amongst wind energy developments. And I think the same thing has to happen here in Minnesota. So my point is you can put grass on the landscape, right? But if they're in a wind energy field, the research would tell us you're not going to get the grassland breeding bird density that you would in areas without turbines. That's the real take-home message here. And as conservation professionals, we need to take that into account as part of mitigation. You can see stuff here that early in Minnesota with some CRP studies that, conservation reserve program areas that did not have turbines had 4 times higher greater breeding bird densities than areas that had turbines. So you got demographic effects, you got abandonment, and you got population level effects that we need to be aware of as we guide the next 30 years of wind energy development. Now, if we look at Minnesota bird and bat fatalities at wind estimates, I want you to focus on, don't go to the right yet, focus on the 2.9 billion birds gone since the 1970s. That was a science article that came out in 2019, caused quite a splash within our field. Now that's, again, that declines from all different factors. That's habitat loss, could be pesticide in the environment, habitat fragmentation, but it also is, cats, it's collision with utility lines, wind development, et cetera, glass windows. So 2.9 billion birds gone since the 1970s. Some of my more skeptical wildlife professionals call that monitoring the decline. And that's what they say, all I do over my career is monitor the decline. And I push back on that. I'm fatigued by monitoring the decline. Our job is to reverse declines. So I think when we talk about mitigation strategies moving forward, we as, I think, society needs to say, okay, how do we start reversing some of these trends? Of all those, that scientific report, right? One of the bright spots in there was waterfall conservation. And why is that? Because we have the North American Waterfall Management Plan, we have prairie pothole joint ventures, we have people all working together in a common good. And when you do that, you can have great success and you can actually reverse those declines. We need that same type of effort for a lot of our grassland bird species that are mostly in trouble, and other water birds as well. So now if we look at the right-hand side, that is actual fatality figures from Minnesota Energy. So in 2021, what happened, the Public Utility Commission, and has for a while, but they require wind developers to do very methodical post-construction mortality monitoring and on their new facilities. And that's 2 years, and it's very rigorous. We're not going to go into it, but they do a great job. They're out there weekly, all year long, or all through the spring through fall, looking at fatalities at wind turbines. So what happened is we had 12 sites all done at the same time and finally done with the same methodology. So we were comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, if you will. So then our energy planning unit took those numbers, and what do? You translate it into then birds per megawatts or bats per megawatts. So you get that average figure, and then we just multiply that out by the number of megawatts in the area. And that's where you get over to 500,000 birds and over to 1.2 million bats. And we're going to delve into these numbers a little bit more. But there, again, that's taken that 2021 projecting 30 years into the forward. Now I've given this talk to other groups, and I talked to researchers, avian ecologists, and they all say, Dave, what you were doing extrapolating out the DNR, that is sound. But what I want to impress upon folks here, that's that number, 30 years and forward, which is about the length of a permit for a wind energy. That doesn't take into account the past 30 years of mortality. And then I ask yourself, think about that if we double the amount of wind energy development in Minnesota, what happens to these numbers? Now, there will be some people that would say, That's 500,000 birds. That's just a whole different groups of species, right? We'll talk about that a little bit, but it's a whole different group of bird species. But we're really concerned on the bats, and that's just really confined to our migratory tree bats. So the points I would have there is the growing research pre-construction survey has no relation to the post-construction mortality. And what that means is, and it is, the wind developers are doing everything they can to avoid this issue. Now, they'll do early coordination with us. We'll say, hey, wetlands, can you, and they are working with us to avoid areas that are important to us as the conservation community. But I think what this research is bearing out is that the sky is habitat. And there's a USGS article that I'll reference at the end that we can have both, but they talked about the sky as habitat. And you know how profound that was for me? I've been in this field for 33 years, and I always worried about the grassland, I worried about the wetland, but I never thought of the sky as habitat. And then that was another time where I kind of sat back in my chair and I'm like, wow, you gotta start thinking about the sky and how birds move and pathways through. So I really think that's a new frontier that we need to be aware of. So let's start thinking about the sky as habitat too, and how we share that with our avian species and with our bat species too, so. And that fatality estimates you're seeing, they're occurring under our current regulatory framework. And again, it's gonna leave it for all of you today. How do we mitigate these impacts? So we're gonna focus on two bird species here to kind of bring home the point of local mortality and then non-local mortality. So if you see on the left-hand side, you got the American kestrel. And if you looked at graph, you see with the decline, that's the breeding bird survey and the trend line for American kestrels in Minnesota. And I've seen this when I started at Lac Parle. Literally, you could not drive down a township road, and every mile there was American kestrel on the wire. It's noteworthy now for me to see an American kestrel. I almost stop and like, wow, there's a kestrel. So just in my little short, lifespan, I have seen the change. Now, I mentioned kestrels as local. If you look nationwide, about 7% of the mortality at wind energy developments, which is probably over 1 million birds, 7% of that are what we'll call diurnal, active during the day raptors, mostly red-tailed hawks and American kestrels. Now, I'm not saying they're breeding, that decline line here is all due to wind energy. It's part of the equation. It's only part of the equation. And we got staff trying to figure out what's going on with kestrels right now. Now, the other one I'm going to talk about on the right-hand side is actually kind of interesting, the golden crown kinglet. Now, that's a bird that we're going to talk about as non-local source of mortality. Golden crown kinglets, their breeding range is the boreal forest, the spruce forest. But in the Midwest, when you look across the Midwest, golden crown kinglets are either number 1 or number 2 most common birds that we find as fatality wind energy developments. And this kind of blew my mind. Again, that's a bird that nests up in the boreal forest. So that gets in, there was some really interesting research out of California that looked at stable isotopes, looking at where those birds originated at that were at fatality. And they were able to kind of tease out some population consequences. So that 500,000 bird represents a whole bunch of different species. I think there's a lot of data there that we need to learn and take into consideration. So golden crown kinglets in Minnesota are doing okay, but when you look at their population stats throughout the rest of the range, they're in sharp population decline. Again, looking at local versus non-local mortality. So bat fatalities, like I said, that's the one that when I talk to my colleagues, the one that we're most concerned in. Collision with wind turbines are one of the leading cause of bat mortality in North America, especially for migratory tree bats, hoary, silver-haired, eastern red, and that all accounts for 70% of all documented bat mortality. And again, the wind developers are going out, they're doing acoustic bat surveys, they're trying their best to avoid riverine, wetland areas. But again, what it's telling, the sky is habitat. Most of this bat mortality is taking place when these migratory tree bats, hence their name migratory, are actually migrating through the state. So, and we all know our bat conservation a little bit. They're under severe threat from white nose syndrome. You got the northern log-eared bat, the tricolored bat might be added to the federal endangered species list here coming up quick. And then wind turbine, the best we can tell, fatalities are additive for both bats and birds. And then again, what happens if we double the megawatts? Those are the challenges. So this is my last slide here. So charting a new path, we can have both. So I would encourage everyone on, if you see on the left hand or right hand side, wind energy and wildlife, we can have both. And I read it's an online article, wind energy and wildlife, we can have both. Find it. And I encourage you to follow all the hyperlinks and read it. We can have both, but it's going to require human motivation. Because that both part was very reliant on technology at turbine sites, smart technology, infrared technology, curtailment of wind turbines when bats are migrating through. And in my career, I just learned you need to have human motivation to bring change. So that's one thing I'll just press upon people here. So what we're going to be doing here very quickly within the DNR, we have the green light from leadership. We're going to be doing a DNR interdisciplinary team, get our experts together. We're going to work with the subject matter experts from the Department of Commerce and both the Public Utility Commission. And let's look at a range of additional strategies regarding wind development and conservation in Minnesota. And I'm really one where I press upon novel ideas, thinking outside the box. And I think that's some of the work that we're going to have ahead of us. I think we have work that's urgency. And the last thing I would leave is that, in many ways, Minnesota is a leader. I think we've been a leader on wind energy development, renewable energy development, and I really think we can be a leader to kind of show the nation how to do wind energy just a little bit differently in the next 30 years. And that's really comes down to adaptive management, which we all should be doing. And with that, questions? Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It's sobering to figure out sort of how you can have both, both in terms of the mortality to birds and bats, the unknown effect it could have on other things, and the sort of it prohibits us from doing conservation on adjoining lands. Has there been any conversation about new strategies to move forward that could look at this differently and give us more flexibility?
Yeah, Chairman Hartwell, I think you bring up good questions. Prior to this, I gave the same presentation to our DNR leadership. We gave the leadership from the Public Utility Commission, PCA, and Commerce were also at the table, if you will. And I think there is a real genuine interest to really look at this issue and look at how we can do things differently moving forward. So I am sitting before you today being optimistic that we can chart a new path forward. I personally think, and again, this is just my personal opinion, the issue on easements, I actually think is an easy one to work through. I think that those layers could be made publicly available, just like a RIM, you can go online and you can see where we have CREP easements, where we have our WMAs, WPAs, and I think that easement layer is to have that as potential. That would really aid us in conservation, and I think we can work through those terms and conditions. I want to be optimistic on that. I look at it as very similar to a conservation reserve program easement. So if we go out and acquire our land with a CRP contract, right? We as a DNR, we waive the payment, but we abide by the terms and conditions. I think there are some novel things there where we can work with the wind energy and say, hey, we'll abide by your terms and conditions. We love to have the wind blow across the WMA. We're not going to build any tall structures, and kind of get that win-win. So I want to be optimistic that there are really things we can do that are tangible where we can have both moving forward.
Mr. Chair, this is Mark. Mr. Chair, this is Mark, if I may.
Yes.
We do have several others on online for comment or helping with Q&A. We do have at least Pheasants Forever, Minnesota Land Trust, Audubon, Bowser, and potentially somebody from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So at least those people, I believe, are online. So if there are questions for any of them, or if they have comments, members, I just wanted to let you know we have more resources here as well.
Yeah, if anyone has a comment from from other groups, NGOs or government groups, we're all ears. I think this is interesting, maybe sobering, especially if the wind development with bigger turbines moves into other areas in the western part of the state. What does that mean? And how do we get ahead of it? Oh, Dudley, I see your hand and you're on mute, so.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for acknowledging and thanks for the presentation. I just want to, I want to ask some questions about the terms and agreement stuff. I mean, what I don't know if you could tell us what does that entail that prevents the conservation, easements and all of those kinds of things from happening? Because it almost feels to me like then that puts us in a race to get conservation easements on land before wind easements are there. It's almost like you're trying to get out ahead of these companies that are popping down these wind easements. And I want to believe that's not the case, but I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit of what the terms and agreements are around a wind easement.
Yes, great question. I'm a little bit on shaky ground because I'm not our lands and minerals attorneys, but when I have visited with them, it's just simple. State of Minnesota, it's indemnification. We cannot, and others in this room can maybe help me with this too, is that we can't be bound to things, costs into the future, if you will. That's a simple way of putting it. That's been I remember working on the Marsh Lake project. That was a big thing, even working with the Corps of Engineers of that future indemnification. So again, it's just obligating the state to certain terms and conditions and financial resources into the future that we just cannot, as a state agency, as a state government, enter into. And then there was just something I know on some of them were just simple terms on how we do go about communication in the future. Conflict of interest. Again, there was just certain terms and language that our real estate branch, our attorneys within our real estate branch has said are unacceptable to the state of Minnesota. So those would be the terms and conditions. You've got to go back to that wind developer and that wind company, and then you need to agree to modify the language again, which is very difficult. So, yeah.
So, I mean, we're not in a race to try to create conservation easements before wind easements. I mean, do you feel like you're in that kind of situation with, as a person who's in conservation work? Do you feel like you're trying to get out ahead of these wind easements?
That's again, that's a good question. I don't want to characterize this as a race. Everyone's acting in good faith. Wind developers are acting in good faith. They're going out and acquiring easements. They need to acquire those easements to be able to have a viable project. We, as I see Saban here, our partners, DUPF, TNC, all our partners are working together in good faith. We're going out and doing conservation. And this wasn't known, again, a year and a half ago, this issue was not known because it didn't hit the scale. And when you start looking at it now we're hitting the scale where I guess I am testifying today, our ability to put conservation on the ground in certain areas of Southwest Minnesota are going to be much more difficult moving forward into the future. So as a wildlife professional, I think we need to figure that out. We need to work together with our wind developers to chart a better course forward. And how can we work within these wind easements? Can we still do conservation on them, and what would that look like? So I think that's a challenge ahead of us.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Lindsay Bryce. I'm from the National Audubon Society, and unfortunately, you don't have the scientists here today. You have the policy wonk, so I can't get incredibly deep into details. But one of the things that Audubon has been engaged in this issue nationally, we haven't been as engaged in Minnesota, and are looking at increasing that engagement because of some of these issues. But one of the places that I have been looking to my colleagues within our organization is Washington State. Washington passed a 100% clean energy bill a few years before Minnesota. I believe it was 2019. And they came across this issue. They're a few years ahead of us in really looking at this and trying to figure out how to accomplish those goals while also accomplishing the state's conservation goals. And one of the things that they've done in Washington that Audubon advocated for was a least conflict process. And what that means in essence is that in this case, it was a university that led the process. I think it could be led in a variety of different ways, but it was a university that led the process, brought together stakeholders, and the stakeholder groups, I don't have the whole list, but in that space, it was ranchers, it was ag, it was conservation, it was developers, it was all, they figured out which stakeholders needed to be at the table. They siloed each of those stakeholder groups, and each of those groups brought their best science to their group to create maps to figure out where they wanted to see wind, where they didn't want to see wind, and where the places sort of in the middle were that there could be some conversation about. And then they overlaid those maps to figure out what places were really ripe for development from the perspective of all of the stakeholders. I think that's one option that Minnesota could consider. The other, in addition to the mapping and those sort of pieces and tools, they also created an interagency council to continue leading that work into the future. And one of the projects that I know this much about, to be full disclosure, that my colleague has told me was really successful there is called the Wild Horse Wind and Solar Facility and Renewable Energy Center. And this one is interesting to me because it really is a multi-use project. I'm not sure how many acres it is, but they're generating 273 megawatts. And that is just on the wind side. They have one of the Northwest's largest solar arrays on that property too, but they're also using that property for hunting, for various forms of recreation. And it's really being used as both multi-use conservation and habitat in different spaces of it. So I think there are some opportunities here. Audubon is really interested in this issue and is really invested in being part of the solution on this. Our intent is really to use our science to try to get to yes on renewables, on transmission build out, in order to do those things and to work with developers and do those things in the way that is the best, in a way that is least harmful to birds and wildlife. So that's why we're here in this space.
Mr. Chair, this is Mark. Because he can see the people in the room as well as on monitoring online during this Q&A.
I can see Chad has been waiting, and I saw Lucy with her hand up before as well.
Okay, Member Swenson has a question as well.
Okay, great. Let's go with Chad, and then I'll go to Lucy and then Jamie.
Thank you, Chair Hartwell and council members for the conversation. I did just want to say that for me at the Land Trust, I work in southwestern Minnesota. That's my program area. This has been an issue for me for at least 3 years. We did have a project that we lost about 500 or 600 acres near Gustafson Lake in Lincoln County that we lost because of wind easements. And that definitely had cascade effects even all the way up until last year, shifting projects. But then I wanted to comment about the race, the idea of a race. And in a way, it is kind of a race because the way we've been looking at it is that the Land Trust likes to take first position legally on the title for the property with our easement. And if there's a wind lease there, then we can't be in first position. And so that's our preference. So in a way, it is a bit of a race to get that first position on the property. there are ways I think that maybe some of the partners have been able to find a way around that. One key there, I think, is communication. Communication with wind companies is very hit and miss, from my understanding with talking to people. Sometimes the entity that owns the array or the farm will move on, and you're chasing somebody in San Diego, and they don't have to talk to me. They really just have to talk to the landowners. So that's definitely a big issue. I think there are ways forward, but I will say that it's definitely been an issue for us for at least 3 years, and I appreciate all the partners that I've talked to about trying to find a way forward here. So thank you.
Great. Lucy, you had your hand up. I don't know if you still wanted to chime in.
Sure. Thank you, Chair and committee members. I just wanted to clarify with Dudley's question about why these terms are such an issue. It's because in my experience with RIM easements, the wind companies take large blanketed rights over large areas of land because they don't know what exactly they're going to do at the time they're planning out their course, right? So they want to make sure they have the right to do everything they could possibly do in the entire area. So even though they might not plan to put up a turbine on this one property or even an underground line or anything, they still take those blanket rights to do those things because they want to leave the door open for that opportunity in the future.
Great. Thank you. It gives us hope.
And I have to say that just sounds horrible to me to even allow them to do that. It just makes me angry that they can even do that, to be brutally honest, when they have no idea what the hell they're going to do in the future. So I just want to say that.
All right. Jamie?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting, something I hadn't thought of before. The one thing I did hear that was alarming is the hesitancy in doing conservation work in Southwest Minnesota. And so if we can talk a little bit more on solutions, we briefly mentioned mitigation, and what I didn't hear is kind of a stricter or an action plan surrounding that addresses that sense of urgency on this issue to try and address, we have conservation funds now. There sounds like there's some hesitancy in doing anything in this area. And so what can we do now? The DNR interdisciplinary team you mentioned as one of those mitigation strategies. And we heard from Audubon on this green print plan approach that's being taken in Washington, and really learning from others ahead of us, Minnesota being one of the leaders, but not the leader as it applies to some of these energy plans. We've heard short term, it sounds like we have our hands tied a bit when it comes to the easement language. So in the short term, if the DNR sees that these can coexist, is there a more strict action plan on what can be done now? So for example, negotiations with the attorneys to figure out the conservation easement language and the wind easement language so that those can coexist. And then two, getting those maps on the ground so that you know exactly where those easements are placed and there isn't assumptions being made on that front.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. I'll just clarify a little bit. We're not pulling back Conservation Region 4. That's, I'm going to be going back there and it's full throttle forward on doing the good work and the land conservation we do. So we're not anyway backstepping from doing good work and great work in Region 4 in that southwest part of the state. And I think that I can say that for our partners. And, Doug Harkey and the Fox Lake team just acquired another 154 acres down there in Martin County just a few days ago. So that's going to work, it's going to continue. But like you said, we do have challenges and the easements moving forward. So that is serious. And like I said, it's something that on January we got the kickoff here. Again, we're going to get our topic experts not only within our agency, but also within Commerce PUC. And I think we got to hammer through these issues. And again, I want to be optimistic today that we can work on the wind easement issue and be able to, do conservation. But again, it's if there's an operational wind easement, there's a wind tower on that farm, that's going to be a little bit more difficult, right? Because if we do, what does conservation look like underneath that wind turbine? So there's gonna be some trade-offs that I think that we need to wrestle with on that aspect, but that's why we're here today. We're having the conversation.
Mr. Chair, Ron has a question.
Yeah,
Mr.
go
Trevor, thank
ahead.
you for a most interesting presentation. You did not mention something that I call pollution of the horizon. As I look at the prairies in Kansas and southwest Minnesota, I go, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? And then as I drive around Minnesota, I also see acres and acres and acres of land being covered with solar panels. And first I thought, well, okay, it would be grassland under there, maybe some birds could nest there, and then I see they're seriously fenced. And I thought, well, maybe that won't work either. What are we doing? What are we doing? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Mr. Chair, I mean, as a wildlife professional, when I look back at my career, when I graduated from college, I never heard of renewable energy, wind farms. I never heard of the term pollinators, inverts, and I mean, so it is the challenge of our conservation community, is that how do we move to more carbon-free sources, but yet integrate that with landscapes that are viable for wildlife conservation into the future. And that's the reality in front of all of us. It's not just the DNR, it's, I would say, as society. And what I am gonna advocate is that just we need to work very closely together. We have a finite resource of land, right? So again, is it a race, is it competition? I don't want to go there. I mean, but the fact is there's a finite resource in front of us. So I think we need to be doing a better job working together, looking at priority landscapes and start looking at corridors. And I'm really starting to push the idea of landscape ecology, where we have pathways for animal migrations. I'll use the word gene flow. So how do wildlife populations move across the landscape? If you get into your more urban areas, the West Coast, the East Coast, Florida, I was just watching a documentary on the Florida panther, where they have very set up corridors. It's very much in part of land use, county zoning and planning for these corridors. We could look at sky as habitat. I think that's where we need to go as a conservation field, as a society, and start looking at this map and having those hard conversations, just that Audubon mentioned, what are our priority landscapes? How do we move through them? There's gonna be trade-offs, there's gonna be winners and losers in that. On solar development, we're gonna be meeting, I think, later this week. There's a development that butts up against 3 waterfall production areas, 1 WMA. And, the fence is 200 feet setback. Well, we're charged with perpetuating wildlife. But what does that look like when you have that exclosure fence? What does that bring up with fair chase, hunting on these properties? So these are difficult conversations, but they're the ones that are in front of us here today. And I think to your point on view sheds, that can be another matter too on, it's getting pretty rare on where you can go to see a stars in the night sky. So there's all challenges we need to work through.
Suzanne?
Yeah, well, we're talking about a lot of these, the easements and setbacks, but, the facts of the decline and the, just the physical evidence of dead birds and dead bats. Is there any work going on technological resolution or techniques that can be used to help these animals to avoid the turbines at all? Has there been any research on that aspect in making requirements for the utilization of some of those techniques for a lot of these companies or not? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, it's a lot of research going on in that field. And I'm not going to claim to be the topic expert on all of it. I'll let you know what I have on. And some of the bird strikes with rotor blades, There was one study out of Norway where they painted one of the blades a different color, and that showed the reduced bird mortality. Again, I just caution, that was one study out of Norway. Again, that works for birds that are migrating during the day, right? You got a lot of birds are migrating at night, so not so much there. Birds are a little bit tough. Tremendous amount of research on bats right now. Our wind turbines in Minnesota are curtailed at night on their manufacturer cut-in speed from dusk to dawn, if you will. Meaning if you don't have wind blowing, their cut-in speed is, the blades are stopped. Curtailment, most of the bat mortality occurs when the rotors are spinning very slow, right? So if you require an increase in the wind speed to get that rotor to start spinning, there's been a number of studies that have shown that can reduce bat fatalities at wind turbines. But what happens if you do what we call blanket curtailment, where all the towers are shut down, well, then you have a loss in energy production, right? So that's one of the trade-offs there. But there's some new technology called smart blanketing, where they got echolocators on the turbines, so they know when bats are nearby and they can feather down the turbines, shut off the rotor speeds. But again, those trade-offs, because that technology is very expensive, and then, you know, how do we get that adopted facility-wide? And then what does that look like? You know, how does that change bat mortality per megawatt? So there is a lot of research on that. Like, that's where I mentioned that USGS report, Wind and Wildlife can have both. If you go on there, they'll talk about all those different curtailment strategies, what states are trying them and stuff. Bat fatalities tend to be more of a Midwest thing, right? Especially East Coast, not as many bats out west. So when you look across the United States, there are certain areas where that bat conservation is more concerning.
Great. Any other, oh, Dudley, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, my question is about turbine, wind turbine design, and whether or not the state has any regulations about the types of turbines that are allowed or not allowed. I mean, I'm even looking now online and seeing there's all these different designs of wind turbines that maybe some might be less impactful on migrating birds and bats. And I was just wondering if the state had, I mean, because pretty much everything you see is these giant, propeller blades, but there are other designs, and just wondering if the state had any regulations about the types of designs that are allowed.
Yeah, I would respectfully have to defer that to the Public Utilities Commission because they would regulate turbine size and stuff, so.
Okay, thanks.
So, thank you. Goal is not to set policy, but being aware of the challenges that wind turbines pose to conservation is important for us. So thank you for your presentation, and for everyone else who's trying to work through this issue, and we'll all hope that we can find some better policy solutions than we've had, as well as better designs or whatever to minimize the impact. Your numbers on the number of bats and birds killed by turbines is way above what I had expected, and very sobering. So we appreciate the work and the concern, and hope you'll continue to bring it up so those that make decisions can take it a little more seriously than they have in the past. So
Thank you.
if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thank you. So the next item is agenda item 8, request for extensions of appropriations. We have 4 requests in front of us. If you'll remember, we got tired of seeing sort of routine extensions and have set up some guidelines for when extensions make sense and when they don't. And so we'll take these one at a time. I'll let staff chime in before we get going, because I know they've dealt with this more than any of the rest of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Mark. I'll give well, our first one's coming up front. I think, let's see. What do we have first?
I think we've got St. Louis.
St. Louis, Melissa, yeah. And then followed by Tracy Hulsengard with Rosa River. And then we have Christine Gaden and I believe Bennett Earl and then Deb Loon. So that'll be the batting order here. Mr. Chair, just real quick, and members, in your packets, Sandy did a really good job of putting together a memo on this where you can see the individual appropriations that they've had. There's some notes from staff on each one. The requests are pretty straightforward, I think, from a timing standpoint, and these individuals can each give us a short, and I emphasize short short description of what the situation is. If you can keep it concise, that would be most wonderful. We are waiting for a 9th vote, and that is Representative Burkle. He is in the building. Hopefully he'll be back here, but we need 9 votes to approve this the recommendations of one or more of these for approval. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I think we'll just turn it over to DNR. Melissa, is she online?
Yes, I am online. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
I
Go ahead.
I will keep it concise. Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Melissa Scholand. I supervise Minnesota DNR's St. Louis River and Lake Superior program based in Duluth. And as you've heard, I'm here today requesting a 1-year extension to our program's ML 2020 appropriation. This extension is required to ensure that the funds in our contracts budget can be spent on constructing habitat restoration projects that are identified in the accomplishment plan. And in our program's long history of partnering with the council, this is the first time that we've ever requested an extension. We have 2 large St. Louis River habitat restoration projects that are on the ML20 parcel list. These projects are a wetland restoration project at Mud Lake and a fish and wildlife passage project on Lower Knowlton Creek. Both of these projects did get to a slow start when it came to getting all the environmental baseline data collected and getting into the engineering and project design. The circumstances are all detailed, in the memo that accompanied my extension request, but they include things like a DNR hiring freeze during the COVID pandemic that limited our ability to hire additional project managers. And then the Mud Lake in particular, that project is being designed under a partnership agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers. And they were pulled away from the project multiple times during 2020 and 2021 in responses to the COVID pandemic and natural disasters. So just as a consequence, we did have a slow start when it came to getting our environmental data collected and moving through all the steps of the engineering design process. But the good news is today, both that Mud Lake project and Lower Knowlton Creek are nearing the end of their design and engineering. We're working through environmental review and permits right now, and both of those projects are on track to begin construction in 2025. However, the timelines for construction mean we won't have that money spent down by the end of the ML20 appropriation, which ends in the end of June 2025. So if we can extend the grant's end date by 1 year, that will allow us to fully spend down the award, achieve our habitat outcomes that are in the accomplishment plan, and then also keep our leverage with the significant non-OHF funds that we have in both of those projects. So that's just brief outline of the situation, and I appreciate your consideration of our requests. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Are there questions? All right. I assume we don't have 9 in the room. I don't see Representative Burkle yet.
He's on his way, Mr.
So
Chair.
we'll hold off on any motions.
He's on his way, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Why don't we
And-
move to the
and he-
next one while we wait?
Mr. Chair, he did just
What?
enter Durham.
Oh, great.
Am I late?
Is there a motion regarding approving or not approving this extension request?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion to request. Any other questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Hartwell.
Yes.
Hartwell, aye. Shara.
Yes.
Shara, aye. Baird.
Aye.
Baird, aye. Representative Burkle.
Burkle, aye.
Burkle, aye. Edmondson.
Aye.
Edmondson, aye. Eggerling.
Yes.
Eggerling, aye. Holston.
Aye.
Holston, aye. Saxhog.
Aye.
Aye. Saxhog, aye. Swenson.
Yes.
Swenson, aye. Mr. Chair, there is 9 ayes, 0 nays.
Great. Motion passes. Get the work done and don't let COVID get in the way again. My advice.
Thank you.
Next up is Buffalo Red River Watershed District.
All right, am I coming through okay?
Yep.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for having us. My name is Bennett Euler. I'm representing the Buffalo Red. I'm their district engineer. So here this morning to talk about the Lower Otter Tail River Corridor Habitat Restoration Project. So this is part of ML 2021. And we had provided a letter kind of outlining our request for an extension. So just kind of highlighting a few of the points. So we have about 18 miles of river that we're looking to restore. And
Bennett, can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Mr. Chair and members, we skipped one. We're actually on 5C right now, the Otter Tail River Corridor, it looks like. That's where Bennett's at. Maybe I would suggest we just let him continue forward and then we'll come back to Tracy Halsengard with Rosanna.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so then as part of that, we're looking at enrolling land in the RIM program to acquire permanent easements for conservation along the river. And so the watershed has made pretty good progress thus far. We partnered with Bowser, they're on this grant, and then also working with the local Soil and Water Conservation District office to help with outreach for the landowners. So a couple of the reasons for the extension request, in working with landowners, because the program is voluntary, we found that it's taken a little bit more time to meet with them and explain the project and get people on board. And then we were also informed by Bowser that it can take 18 to 24 months from when a landowner signs up to when an easement is finalized. And that's probably the main reason why we're requesting the extension, because we had some restoration funds in this grant too, and those are good until 2026. But as far as the land acquisition, that extension or that expiration date would be on the June of 2025. And so what we've run into is that if we were to sign up a landowner today with that 18 to 24 month window that would need to be finalized before those funds could be expended, we actually wouldn't have time to do that. So that was one of the reasons. And then we've also been working with the Corps, and we found out that the goals of the state of Minnesota did not align real well with what the Corps wanted to see on this project as far as permanent easements. They had some issues with having the word conservation in the easement, and the watershed ended up deciding to not use the Corps funding, and they're just going to use other funds that they have for this restoration project. And then lastly, there's quite a bit of turnover at the local soil and water office, and so we had a little bit of issue getting traction with their staff and outreach. So all that to say, we are requesting an extension for the RIM easement portion until June 30th of 2027. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Sure. Are there questions? I don't see any. Are there any in the room? You're a little screen for me, but.
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I have a concern because it seems like you didn't know what you were doing when you asked for the money. and everyone knows that Bowser takes a while to do their easements, and frankly, they're getting them done within the time frame that they have the funds available. They didn't always, but they've come around. So your partner is able to do it.
Sure.
What in the world happened that you're so far behind? And it seems like you just didn't take it very seriously from day one, and now you're asking for more time to take it seriously, and that's concerning to me.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I would say, without trying to throw people under the bus and take responsibility as the watershed, we were relying heavily on the Soil and Water Office, since they are the ones who administer the rim easements. And so that proved to not go real well. They lost a couple of their district managers during the time that we've had the grant. And so the staff that they have now are inexperienced with going through the rim process. And so we've actually worked with John Boz, and he helped the watershed to sign an agreement with the Soil and Water, so that now the watershed district is going to be the ones to go through that grant process rather than the SWCD. So now the watershed can take it on their own and take the initiative to do that outreach themselves. So we won't be relying on others now. We'll be able to do it ourselves.
Any other comments? I think we put our policy in place to avoid this kind of thing, and to tell our partners to be serious about what they're doing and ready when they come to us. I'm sympathetic to your position. I'm going to vote against the extension just because I don't think this fits. I recognize all of your problems, but we put the policy in place so that we didn't have endless extensions because people weren't ready to go when they got the money. And that's just my comment. Others will feel very differently, I'm sure. But I'd be happy to take a motion one way or the other. Is there a motion anywhere? No. With no motion, the request is not approved. We'll move on now to what was to be the second Roseau River habitat restoration. And I'm sorry for getting it out of order.
Thank you, Chairman Hartwell. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Chairman and council members, my name is Tracy Halstensgaard, and I am before you today asking for an extension for our Roseau River grant application from the 2020 allocation. And as you have in your information, we ran into a couple of unexpected delays with the project. Early on, we had some high water issues that delayed some of the additional data gathering. We've had some permitting delays, and most recently, we had some landowners that addressed some additional concerns with our board. And the board also wanted to make sure and clarify that the upstream landowners, as well as landowners downstream of the project area, were made sure that they were heard and that their concerns were answered and addressed. At our October board meeting, we held our public hearing to relocate State Ditch 51 into the new meandered channels. And at our November meeting, the board approved the findings and order to do so for the project. So we are moving forward. We are ready and prepared to bid the project this winter, spring. So we will be moving dirt before the grant actually expires. However, we do feel that we would like to have an extension of until 2027 in order to make sure we have time to complete that construction. So yeah, we are on the cusp, on the brink of remeandering portions of the project, and hopefully the board sees the benefit in allowing us the additional time. And with that, I'd entertain any questions. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Tracy. I think the
We're
chair
having
may.
some difficulty.
There we go. Now we hear you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. I was having difficulty hearing. Are there questions for Tracy? Are there questions for Tracy? I don't see any questions. I wonder what would happen if we gave you a 1-year extension instead of 2, Tracy.
We will get as much dirt moved and as much funding spent as we possibly can. The area that we will be working in is also subject to water inundation, so obviously weather will play a factor. Although most of our construction will take place during the winter months, a 1-year extension, could, depending on weather, provide us all the time we need to get work done.
All right, any comments or thoughts from the council? Is there a motion?
I will make that motion. Representative Burkle.
To grant a 2-year extension?
Yes.
Just to be clear. All right, any other discussion? Tom, will you call the roll?
Starting with number 2 on our list, Shara.
No.
Shara, no. Baird.
Yes.
Baird, aye. Representative Burkle.
Burkle, aye.
Burkle, aye. Edmondson.
Aye.
Edmondson, aye. Eggerling.
Yes.
Eggerling, aye. Senator Herr.
Yes.
Senator Herr, aye. Holston.
Yes.
Holston, aye. Saxog.
Yes.
Saxog, aye. Swenson.
No.
Swenson, no. Hartwell.
Yes.
Hartwell, aye. Mr. Chair, there are 8 ayes, 2 noes.
All right, the motion is not sufficient to grant the extension, as we need 9 votes. Thank you, Tracy. We will move on now to the last project, which is Metro Big Rivers.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the council. This is Deb Loon with the Minnesota Valley Trust. I appreciate the opportunity to appear and make this request. I'm going to call this a better safe than sorry request to grant a 1-year extension for our Ikes Creek Restoration Project on the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge in Bloomington. This is our ML 2020 grant. The Ikes Creek Restoration Project is moving along as planned. Studies are complete, permits are in process, environmental assessment is complete. We have received 100% design plans and are moving expeditiously to issuing the RFP for the work. We anticipate completing this on time as planned by the June 30th, 2025 grant deadline. The reason for the request is that the archaeological review identified moderate to high potential of significant archaeological and cultural resources near the work area, but not in the work area. We are working with local tribes and developing a monitoring plan. Work will occur this upcoming winter and spring season. If any potential archaeological and cultural resources are found during construction, work will need to stop for further investigation. This potential puts the project at risk of not being completed by the deadline of June 30th, 25, and accordingly, we respectfully request an extension of the grant appropriation to June 30th of 26. You can have confidence that our intention is to not have to use the extension. We appreciate your understanding of the situation and approval of this one-year buffer. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Are there any in the room I can't see? Apparently
No,
not.
Mr. Chair.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve SACSOG.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Tom, call the roll, please.
Mr. Chair, members, starting with number 3 on our list, Baird.
Baird, aye.
Baird, aye. Representative Burkle.
Burkle, aye.
Burkle, aye. Edmondson.
Aye.
Edmondson, aye. Eggerling.
Yes.
Eggerling, aye. Senator Herr.
Yes.
Senator Herr, aye. Holston.
Aye.
Holston, aye. Saxhog.
Yes.
Saxhog, aye. Swenson.
Yes.
Swenson, aye. Hartwell.
Yes.
Hartwell, aye. Shara.
Aye.
Shara, aye. Mr. Chair, there being 10 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Good luck. Next on our agenda are discussions of the accomplishment plans. And I'll turn this to staff, especially Sandy, who's done a lot of work to understand the accomplishment plans and as importantly, to point out the concerns that came up with unanswered questions or additional detail that's needed.
Mr. Chair and members, I'll take the first stab at it. So after the council made their most recent allocations, they went from proposals to what we're calling accomplishment plans, and the accomplishment plans spell out exactly what the program managers are going to do, their budgets, where they're going to be working, et cetera. So we have had those, and staff reviewed all of the accomplishment plans, and I'll bring your attention to the first spreadsheet. The upper right, it says follow-up questions, edits needed. And for the most part, everything was in good order. You are switching from 2 different documents, again, from the proposal to the accomplishment plan. And so those answers and the information in there has to be transferred from those documents. And so a lot of them were just, people missed putting those answers in there, and those have been taken care of. So there's really no issues with those. So if you look at like the neonic question wasn't answered, it isn't that they didn't want to, it's just that either they forgot or just, in the transition process, it wasn't done. So there were quite a few like that, which are no big deal. Those have been taken care of. There are a couple instances where just the acres throughout the document weren't lining up, so we had them take care of that. I'll bring your attention to, let's see here, how about the East Park W. May Nelson Salute, WRE01. So that was the second project on the second page on the top. There was a question with their acres because they had said that they will be doing the entire project with the amount of money that they received. So we just wanted to get clarification from them. And we are correct that they are including all of the acres in their accomplishment plan because the money that they are getting will, they'll be able to do the entire project. So we got email clarification with that, and then the document shows that. Let's see, Big Swamp North, again, we wanted clarification. The council was clear that the council only wanted money being spent on the stream restoration and not the peat restoration. And so we got clarification from them that indeed all of the money will be spent on the stream restoration. Let's see, the Spring Road Conservation Project, that was just an issue with acres throughout the document. We got that taken care of. There was a question we had on HA09, Metro Big Rivers, that was 4 from the bottom on the second page. And it was just an anomaly that the easement, the total easement cost per acre or $2,000 more than fee title costs, and got clarification from MLT that they're including, part of that calculation includes all of the costs, and so their personnel and all those other costs are included in that per acre average, and so, they're, that's just why it's that high, and we don't feel that there's any issue there, and they also budgeted on the conservative side to make sure that if they did find some real expensive, high-quality conservation easements, they could do it and not blow out their budget. And then also HA 13, so this is the top project on the third page. There was some questions about whether or not the money should go to Bowser or to the Candy Ojai Soil and Water Conservation District. We got that taken care of. The money is indeed going to go to the Candy Ojai Soil and Water Conservation District. Bowser is going to do the actual acquisition of the easements, and then Candy Ojai County will do the management and the design work for the restoration. So the restoration money will go directly to Bowser, or to Candy Ojai Soil and Water Conservation District, but Bowser will be acquiring the parcels with other funds not in this appropriation. And so that's the general overview of all of the accomplishment plans. We felt they're in pretty good shape. And of course, as the additional funds could or couldn't be available in December, and then we may have to revamp and rework all of the accomplishment plans again based on the total money being allocated. So these are working documents, and the actual process, you won't actually approve these until next June. And that's when the project managers will update their budgets and get their most recent up-to-date parcel lists in order, and that's when the council will approve them. Moving
So
on
what's
to
this?
number two of this is we had to,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and members, we had to figure out the DNR land acquisition costs and IDP budget. That was 03 in your proposals. And that's money that goes to the DNR when anytime a NGO acquires a parcel of land for the DNR, either as a wildlife management area, SNA, money has to be spent to review appraisals and go through the whole state acquisition process. So a couple of years ago, we changed the process, and at first there was basically the DNR and each partner created a letter and essentially another contract to spend those funds, and this is a way to shorten that process and make it more efficient. So instead of doing 20 different contracts with everyone, it's just one appropriation to the DNR, and DNR spends that money according to how each partner is spending their acquisition dollars. And so in order to figure out how much money the DNR needs, we had to calculate the amount of land acquisition costs and IDP funds in each of those appropriations that are going to be acquiring those lands for DNR. And so the second spreadsheet with the top right columns, it says LAC, IDP, and then total. So those are all the not appropriations, but accomplishment plans that have all funds for those budget categories in their budgets. And so if you look at the bottom, there's a total of $550,300. The original proposal request from DNR, the 03 DNR core functions and partner-led OHF acquisitions was $847,000. So there's a difference there of about $300,000. We've talked to DNR about that. It's a little short, and we're still working through whether or not they feel that will be enough to make them whole. As of right now, they probably would be okay with maybe $100,000 less, maybe. And again, it will depend on how much money, additional funds there will be in December, because if there's more money going for acquisition, then the LAC and IDP funds should, in theory, go up higher. And so that would possibly eat that $100,000 shortfall. So we're still working through that process, but these are the most up-to-date numbers at this point. So, go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Chair.
just to clarify what you're saying, if we let the proposals go through as they were submitted to us, with each of the proposer having in their budgets these numbers, that's all the DNR is going to get to do the work. And they've worked out that with the DNR, but the DNR is saying if you give us the money directly instead of having it embedded in the proposals, we want an extra $300,000. Do I understand that correctly?
Mr. Chair and members, it's a little bit of an art, I think, to try and budget for this. I think they're obviously budgeting on the safe side and the conservative side because they don't want to run out of money. The last 2 years that we've done this, the first report, when we tally up all of the LAC and IDP funds from all of the accomplishment plans, they're really close, like within anywhere from 60,000 to 20,000. So they've been really close, amazingly. And this is the first time that they've been a little off. And so we are going through and looking at all of the partner budgets to make sure that they were budgeted appropriately, I'll say. They have a rule of thumb that for every $500,000 of acquisition, they want to have $10,000 in that LAC budget. So that's the most accurate way of doing it. But the problem is that because the accomplishment plans are, some of them are still open and not closed in our system, we can't run a report to get the actual number because the system doesn't allow that. There's just a lot of technical stuff going on with our system. So whatever report we would run would not be accurate. So we're waiting for a few folks to finish up their edits, and then we can run that report. So like I said, it's still a working document, and we're still working on those numbers. And then again, based on December, it could go up or down, I guess.
But Joe, our premise in doing all of this was to make it easier for our partners and have it cost no more money. And what you're saying is it may be easier for our partners, but the DNR is asking for, a lot more money than was in the budgets, and the individual partners would have paid them for the services that they're getting. So it's hard for me to get really excited about saying, let's make it easy for everyone if it costs us an extra $300,000. Or am I missing something? I don't understand why this would make sense for us.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, their request is just, it's just an estimate, a guesstimate based on, previous year's funding. And so, if the total amount of acquisition that the council recommends for DNR acquisition goes down, then the number would go down. If the total amount of money for DNR acquisitions over the entire appropriation went way up, then the number would go way up. So we're just trying to rectify that difference right now, making sure that DNR is okay with it, with the amount of money that this process has.
David, if I could have a question.
Please ask.
I think what I'm hearing from Joe, it would make sense that the number is 550 and change, and then that number is reassessed come December once we have more information. Would that be accurate?
Correct.
I think the message, and I agree with you, Jamie, the message has to be, bring us something that makes sense in December. Because it's not making sense that it costs more to have the DNR do it without reimbursement from the partners than if they just get reimbursement from the partners, and that's not the way this should work. So I would encourage the DNR and partners to put their heads together and make sense of this.
And just
Because
one
once
more
we
thing,
appropriate
I'd be remiss not to say, I mean, we could try and get rid of the red tape altogether and put the $500,000 towards on-the-ground projects, but, well, let the DNR decide that.
Other comments?
I just wanted to add some historical context to this. So in the past, projects have been able to submit amendments to increase their DNR budget. And so oftentimes what we saw was over the course of 4 or 5 years, that may have been increased. Now we're asking folks to estimate this upfront based on the number of parcels and the dollar amount of those parcels, which is kind of unknown when they put together a proposal or even put together an accomplishment plan. So it's not, like Joe had stated, it's not an exact science, and we're all kind of learning as we abandon the old process of being able to have the flexibility to amend those dollars up when needed. So I think it's important that, DNR gets what they need to do to help our partners get their job done.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, which is what happens if we give the DNR what they're asking for, but they don't spend it? Do they get money back to us, or is it just stay in the DNR's budget somewhere?
No, the money gets turned back to the fund just like it would with any other project, whatever the balance is, and that's the case with DNR too.
All right, other questions? So I assume, Joe, that all of the issues you brought up initially will be recognized in a revised accomplishment plan from everybody, which if they had no other changes in money, we would approve in the spring, but it would incorporate everything that the staff so diligently found were questions or errors in the accomplishment plans. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and members, that's correct.
Great. So there's no other action on this at this point other than knowing that there's probably going to be some adjustment once we get the December forecast, which we'll have to then see amended accomplishment plans depending on the money, but we provided guidance to the partners on what happens if there is additional money, and to our staff already. So if there are no other questions, we'll just move on. All right. Well, thank you to the staff for doing yeoman's work. This is a lot of work to read through all those plans. I read through many of them, but not with the fine tooth comb that you did. And we deeply appreciate all the work. It keeps everyone honest and on track and makes our job easier. So just thank you from me and the rest of the council. I have nothing else. Were there any requests for the public to address the council?
Mr. Chair, there were not.
All right. Unless anyone has anything else they'd like to bring up, I'll adjourn the meeting. Seeing and hearing nothing. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday, everyone, and we'll see you in December. The meeting is adjourned.
Mark, do you want to hit that?
Question being the movie. Some of these extensions. Yes.